pleased that you've come to join us on this lovely sunny evening. I hope you're doing well. I don't know if any of you been to a dialect dinner before, um, or are familiar with the concept. I know some people are. So what I'll do is I'll quickly introduce the concept of dialect dinner. Oh, got someone else coming in. So Juliet and I, who run Dialect, we set this up a little while ago because we are familiar with how difficult it can be to get to literary events when you maybe have children, or maybe you live in a really rural place and it's hard to get to towns and cities where those kinds of events are sort of to a penny. And it can be really frustrating, or maybe you've got children and you live in a really rural area. So we wanted to set up something that was really accessible to everybody. And we're also really familiar with the idea that actually, when this is from our work in person, in community events, there is something really special. There's something quite magic that happens when you have food added into the equation. So when people gather to eat together, when they break bread together, there's something really special about the conversations that happen then. And obviously, we can't actually have food delivered to your door for an online dinner, but we can use our imaginations, and we're all storytellers here, and we all have great imaginations. So we wanted to create the slightly madcap thing, which is an online imaginary dialect dinner with a series of amazing authors who are going to come along and bring the food for us. So each author who comes along as our guest is the person who is bringing along three courses that are their own. It might be their favorite food, it might be food related to their writing, and be absolutely anything they like. So we're not limited by practicalities in any way. There's no washing up. You don't have to clear up afterwards. And so the food can be anything we like. And that will provide an introduction to the rest of our discussion, which will be about that person's writing life. So I just want to introduce this evening our guest for the evening. Our guest is Sarah Steele. She is a best-selling novelist. Sarah is the author of the USA Today bestseller, The Missing Pieces of Nancy Moon, The School Teacher of Saint Michel, and The Lost Song of Paris. And her latest novel, The Traitor's Wife, is set between World War II Naples and the golden age of Hollywood. So Sarah is not just a novelist. She trained in London as a classical pianist and violinist. And then she joined the world of publishing as an editorial assistant at Hodder and Stoughton. And she was for many years a freelance editor and now lives in the vibrant Gloucestershire town of Stroud, which I think many of our guests are familiar with. So welcome, Sarah Steele, to the fourth Dialect Dinner. Very, very pleased and proud to have you along as our guest. And I'm going to hand over to you at this point to introduce our starter for the evening. And I'm just going to check in before I do, actually, that everybody's got their drinks and their nibbles. Everybody got something with them to drink and to nibble on as we get into our first course. I haven't got an Aperol Spritz, but I really wanted to have one. I had to make do with some water this evening. I hope everyone's got a good drink with them. And Sarah, what are you bringing along for our starter?
So I was going to bring along for the starter um, soup and bread as served in the cafe of the National Archives. But given the weather, I just think that's totally inappropriate. So I am actually going with an Aperol Spritz. We're going to be in Italy. It's aperitivo hour. We're going to sit in a little bar and we're just going to have all sorts of bits and pieces, olives, crisps, and maybe some toasted almonds and a large glass of Aperol. And I've worn a dress that actually looks like a glass of Aperol Spritz, as you can see. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Emma and Juliet. I am an historical novelist, and research is my absolute passion. I just love it. I love it almost as much as the writing bit. So I thought I might talk about my research process tonight. So I've divided it up into three different courses. And for our appetizer, while we're drinking our Aperols and getting the waiter to fill up the bowls of olives, I want to talk about finding physical things that can fuel our research and our story and how they drive things. I don't know if you can see the screen that I'm sharing at the moment. There's a dress pattern up there, and you might recognize that fabric in the background. It's what I'm wearing now. Um, so my very first book, The Missing Pieces of Nancy Moon, which sounds like I'm advertising it, I'm not. It's about a woman who finds a box of vintage dress patterns, and in each one there's a tiny scrap of fabric. There's a postcard from a different place on the French Riviera and in Italy, and a photograph of a woman wearing each of the outfits, all dated back to 1962. Um, I collect old dress patterns, and actually, this pattern that you can see on the screen becomes one of the dresses in my book. And I just love that physical, tactile feeling of touching something that people touched years ago. So if I buy a vintage dress pattern, I might open it. Somebody's already cut it out. They've adapted the size because they're a slightly different shape. They might have a bigger bust, they might have small shoulders. There's something so personal about it. You can see the pin marks in the paper. It's a really visceral thing. It just takes you straight back. And it just made me want to write a story about more of these dresses. And I'm going to just try now. I am not very tech minded, as Emma has learned, but I'm going to try to move on to the next slide here, which is another pattern that I used in the book. Because we're drinking Aperol on the coast, I thought we needed to have one of the patterns from the book that takes us to the beach. So this was from a scene in Antibes, where my character Nancy goes down on her tour around Europe. So picking up something old, something that has been around, that existed in the era that you want to write about, is really useful. I did for this book, I don't know if this is going to come up backwards, but I got an old copy of Parry Match, went through that. If you buy a picture post, I've got a picture post here. I collect a lot of these things, and they're wonderful for just taking you back to the era. The best thing often about these old magazines and newspapers is the adverts, because they're what everybody was using. The hair cream, the shoe polish, the face cream, the washing powder just completely transports you to a different era and gives you those little bits of colour that really bring your book alive and that make people say to you, oh, I remember my grandmother used to use that, or my mum used to have that, or my grandparents had a sofa like that. Those little things, the bits of colour, are what make your story feel real and make you feel like you're there as well, because you have to transport yourself before you can take the reader there. You have to transport yourself and really, really feel yourself in this world. I usually have a mood board, so I have like a sort of a pin board, and I'll take photographs or screenshot lots of things relevant to the time I'm writing about, and I'll get them all printed off, and I make this board, so I have it in front of me all the time I'm working, so it just keeps my head in the place. If I'm writing a war book, it can be a bit grim, but writing this book about Nancy Moon was really lovely because my board was cool, full of really beautiful images. Now, one of my favorite places to research is the National Archives, which is why I thought about offering you a bowl of soup and bread from the cafe there, but it is too hot, so we're not going to do that. Um, so you can probably hear my dog. I've got a very fretful dog just making stupid noises down here. Um, as an historical writer, the National Archives is just the dream ticket. It's amazing. You can look online, you can plan what you want to research, you can look up different documents, different eras. Um, if you're like me and incredibly cheeky, you get in touch with the press office and find someone who specializes in the area that you're writing about. Um, and I did that. My second and third books are set in France. They're about the French resistance. The first is set in the Dordogne. It's about the resistance in the countryside. And the second of those, The Lost Song of Paris, is about the resistance in Paris. And I wanted to write a book. I had this idea of, I think it was during the lockdown, the winter lockdown, and you couldn't go anywhere. And I had to write another book, and I needed to write about somewhere I knew. So I thought, I know London and I know Paris. So I'm going to do another book about the French resistance. Um, as Emma explained, I'm a musician as well. And I don't know what got, I be in my bonnet about muscle memory. And I think I'd been playing the piano and just started playing something I hadn't played for years and years and years. And I was thinking about what we were going to have, sourdough probably. It was lockdown. Um, but my fingers knew what to do. So I want to write about I want to write about a pianist who's lost her memory, but still has that facility to remember what her hands have done for all those years. And then what if she were a spy? What if she'd been recruited by the secret services? Um, so I then knew I wanted to start looking at some spy files. So I got in touch with the archives and I made great friends with Dr. Butler, who is their Second World War specialist, who is amazing. So he just sent me links to all the different files I would need. I just had to order them up. I arrived at the archives, we had lunch, we had a really good chat, and then I went up, and then there was my locker with all the files that I'd ordered. And it was remarkable. And it just made me realize there are whole stories in each of these files. You think you're going to write one story, but then you find other things. And there was one file I found that was extraordinary. It was about a woman who was an agent in France. And she'd gone missing. She'd been to Ravensbrück, and her husband was pushing the SOE, um, her SOE handler to tell him that she was dead so that he could um, sort to sell the house and marry someone else. And all these tiny little domestic stories as well. So I thought I'd just take you through one file that I looked at. Now, so this is it's slightly gloomy reading, but it's really interesting, and this is a perfect example of how seeing something face to face, hands on, that has that was touched all those years ago is so extraordinary and so moving. And what it did for me was made me care so much about my characters. It made me care so much about getting things right because I knew I had a responsibility to the people who had done these incredible acts. And we kind of, the war's a long time ago. We've seen lots of films and we've read lots of books, but when you actually see these things face to face, it's so overwhelming and so humbling. So I'm just going to show you some things that I found there. Um, oh, here we go. Text space. So, okay. So this is the file of, have you heard, I don't know if anyone's heard of an agent called Odette Hallows. There was a film made about her and she ended up in Ravensbrück. So when you order up a file, you have to physically untie the ribbon and you open it out, and this is what you get at the beginning. You get a photograph of the agent, you get the detail of their training. So suddenly you're looking at this woman who many people have heard of, who did these remarkable things. I won't tell you what happened to her in Ravensbrück, but she survived because they thought she'd married a man called Churchill, so they thought she was related to Winston Churchill. So she survived because they thought they could use her as a bargaining chip. So this is Odette. Another file that I looked at was that of Villette Szabo, who was an incredible young woman. She was half French. She'd married a French soldier. She went through her training in 1943, at which point the average life expectancy of an agent in France was 6 weeks. They were really, really running out of agents. It was at the point that the Germans could actually have won the war. So they recruited as many young people as they could, particularly if they spoke French, like Violette. So, oh, hang on, I've gone too fast. Um, so this is Violette's training report. And you can see here that she wasn't fit for purpose. She had, they described it as a fatalistic attitude. She failed on a lot of the tests. She shouldn't have been there. And he actually says, I've come to the conclusion this student is temperamentally unsuitable for the work, but they sent her anyway. So this is the point we're at. This woman was barely 20. She'd got a little girl. Um, Her husband had gone missing. They parachuted her into France. And when she got there, and I read all the reports of these, she actually got into a gunfight with some German soldiers and saved the lives of other agents. So they went and they left her in a shootout with these soldiers. She was eventually arrested and taken to Ravensbrück, um, and disappeared for quite a long time. This is what I found, the details of the clothing. Oh, sorry, I'm really not very good at this techie bit. The clothing that she was issued by the Special Operations Executive. And there's something so personal about her battle dress top, her trousers, two shirts, one with a collar. And then her signature, you can see where she signed for her clothing, size 4.5 shoes. It's so personal. Um, and then poor Violette disappeared. Her father wrote to the Red Cross. So in 1944, when France was liberated, the Red Cross moved in very, very quickly to try and find missing agents. So Vera Atkins, who ran the sort of the women agents at the SOE, went into France, worked with the Red Cross. People were writing letters all over the place. Nobody knew where a lot of these women had gone. They've even spelt her name wrong. You can see here. She was last seen having been deported to Germany in 1944. So this is, you can see this is June 7th, 1945. So she's been missing for a year now. There's still hope that she might be alive, but nobody knows because they haven't liberated the camps in Germany yet. Um, we're now in October 1945, no sign of her. This is one of the most heartbreaking things I found in any of the archives. It's a letter from Vera Atkins to Violette's mother. Dear Mrs. Bushell, we are holding a brown paper parcel containing your daughter's camel hair coat. As we have to give up our storeroom, I'm arranging to have the parcel delivered to you for safekeeping. We are unfortunately still without further news. It's so short, but it's so heartbreaking. Can you imagine how that woman must have felt receiving that note, receiving her daughter's coat, and her daughter's been gone for 18 months now? It's just horrendous. And there's a little receipt that Mrs. Bushell sent back saying received with thanks. That was it. Very simple. Um, and then sadly, later on, we receive a report. So this is now March 1946. So I was able to follow the whole story of Violette through her file, through all this paperwork. And this was a deposition given from some people who'd witnessed her at Ravensbrück and had seen her murdered by the Germans. So the hope is now dashed. You followed Violette, you followed her through her training. You've seen the letters to her parents, her parents' desperate kind of pleas for someone to find her. And then this is the moment where all hope is lost. And it's taken a long time. So she's been gone a long, long while by this point. It's just heartbreaking. And I think it's so important to, when you're writing about this stuff, particularly if you're writing about World War II, or I mean, you could find anything in the archives, to actually see it and feel it and follow these stories is incredibly humbling. Um, Very, very sad, but it makes you write a better story. It made me care about every one of my characters in my spy books, particularly in my Paris book, which has more, it's more of a kind of, it's SIS, MI6, if you like. So there are quite a few MI6 agents in that book. And each one of them became a real person. And
Process of accessing the National Archives. Can anybody do it?
anybody can do it. They are our archives. They are for us to use. They're for our perusal. You just have to register for a reader's card, which you do online when the first time you order some documents, and it's best to order them in advance if you're going because they've got something like, I don't know, 300 miles of shelving there. So if you order things in advance, it saves you a lot of time because they've got to run around and collect them. So yeah, just order a reader's card when you place your first order, and then you go in and they take your picture and you've got your card, and that's it, you're in. You can't take, I mean, there are a few little rules, like you can't take pens in with you, obviously, because these things are so delicate. You can take a pencil, but nothing else. You can't take food and drink. Um, but otherwise, it's really straightforward. And the website's quite easy to navigate, actually. And if you're stuck, you can just email them. There'll be somebody who knows how to find what you're looking for. But the rabbit holes are just amazing.
What have we got for our mains?
Okay, so I'm going to talk now about actually visiting the places that you want to write about, because reading all about it and reading finding all your resources and things are one thing, but there is no substitute for going to the place. So I remember when it was locked down and I talked to my publishers a while ago about writing a book about Cuba, and they said, "Well, can't you just write it?" Well, no, I can't go to Cuba, but you can watch films and read books. It doesn't work like that. I mean, they should know that really. But there is no substitute for being on the ground and walking in the shoes of your characters. and certainly with my Paris book, as soon as I was able to get to Paris in 21, I got myself over there, and I there's there's a few chapters in the book where my main character is on the run around Paris, and I walked her entire route, which was also useful because I realised there wasn't a footpath on one side of the Seine in that bit, so that's not going to work. She'd got to go that way. But it just really, really brings it alive. So I'm going to take you to Naples for our next one.
Amazing.
So this is my friend Catherine, who's going to be really, really delighted to be featuring in this talk tonight. So my fourth book, Traitor's Wife, is set in 1943, and I don't know how much you know about the war in Italy. I thought I knew a bit, and then I started researching it and realized I knew nothing, and how utterly complicated it was. And I discovered this period in Naples called the 4 Days of Naples, and it's September 1943. The Allies have arrived in um, Sicily, ready to invade Italy. Mussolini's been deposed, and the Germans are now flooding south. They're going to take over the whole country. It's totally brutal. Hitler has said to his soldiers, just destroy Italy, destroy all the coastline, destroy all the power supplies, destroy all the water supplies, just give them nothing. We're not going to there'll be nothing left for the Allies when they get there. Um, so it was really, really rough times. And Naples in particular, because it's such a strategic port and it's quite poor, really, really suffered. So by the summer of 1943, there was a famine, there was an outbreak of typhus. It was People were starving to death, they were ill. People were having to eat sea urchins. People were trying to desalinate their own seawater to drink. It was absolutely horrific. Um, Young women were put into, I think by the time the Americans arrived to liberate Naples, something like 1 in 3 women was involved in prostitution just to survive. It was horrific. Um, so the Allies had landed, they were working their way up towards Naples. The Germans had come down and were crushing Naples. A lot of the men in Naples had been arrested and were being deported for forced labor camps. So pretty much Naples was full of women, children, and old people. And the women, they just had enough. They had had enough. So about a week before the Americans arrived in Naples, they decided to fight back. So they'd chuck things out of the windows of their apartments and they'd barricade the streets. They'd throw like marble bathroom counters on top of German tanks. Kids were breaking into police um, stations and German arms dumps to steal ammunition. Were fighting them. So the women, the children, and the elderly terrorized the Germans, absolutely terrorized the Germans to the point where they left. So the white flag went up after they'd caused a hideous amount of carnage and violence and death. They left. So by the time the Americans arrived 2 days later to say, "We've come to save you, Naples, it's all going to be fine, we're here," the women said, "Well, done it, they've gone." Um, and this story of Naples just doesn't seem to get talked about because I think Naples, and here is my friend Catherine, who is about to tuck into our main course, which is a pizza served in the Spanish Quarter. This was a little restaurant in the Spanish Quarter of Naples, and you can see we've got a really nice bottle of, it's probably Lacrime di Cristo there, Christ's blood, which is a lovely red wine grown on the slopes of Vesuvius. You can't see the singer who's just out of shot, who was absolutely appalling, who tried to serenade us for most of the evening. We managed to block him. So here you are with a pizza with buffalo mozzarella just to get us really in the mood for Naples. So I had my story in my head. I knew about the women, I knew about what had happened, and I was really struggling to find my own story within that. So this is the thing about writing about a specific period. There are stories. I mean, I could have written a story about Violette Szabo. I didn't. I wrote a story about someone from my imagination based on what I'd learned of Villa Zorbo. And I was really struggling to work out who my people were in this book. Who is my main character? What's her motivation? Where does she live? What's her daily life like? Um, I had two trips to Naples actually. I went once in March when it was cooler, and then I went back that summer just to experience the heat at the time of year when my book is set, which is August, September. Um, this is the beautiful Piazza Dante. And I've got a couple of scenes here. It's a very beautiful square, and when I was there, I learned that actually a lot of the resistance members would meet in the square and pretend to read newspapers and pass messages to each other. And you can see the statues all along the top here. Um, German snipers would stand there and just randomly fire off shots at anyone they thought was resistance. And today you wouldn't know. It's just a really, really beautiful, beautiful place. And there's an arch through, you can just see that goes through all these sort of secondhand bookshops and what have you. It's quite amazing. Um, so to walk that again was just fantastic. Now this is a really special place. It looks nothing here. This is a school, a liceo. Um, there's a famous there's the one film I found about the 4 days of Naples, because there was only one film about it, the Quattro Giornate di Napoli, is an Italian film made in 1962 by a filmmaker called Nanni Lloyd, who is from Naples, and he made this black and white film about the 4 days of Naples, and all the cast are Neapolitan. So he wanted to make it as a kind of homage to his city and to what the people had done. And he filmed it in streets that were still bombed out because Naples had no money. So the place was just trashed for until the sort of 70s, 80s when the mafia money started fueling regeneration of the city. So a lot of the place was still trashed. And there's this remarkable scene in the film, which is famous amongst Neapolitans. And there was a manhunt in the city, and over 2 or 3 days, the Germans went into every house and they pulled out. There was a statutory work order for men aged between 18 and 35. So the soldiers went in and they pulled out men from 14 to 90, essentially. Any man was just dragged from their home. If you refused to leave, they would just set a flamethrower on your house, burn your apartment down. People were hiding their grandfathers in wardrobes and under holes in the ground. There are caves under the city, um, which a lot of people hid in. So a lot of the palazzos in the courtyard, there's a little trapdoor that would lead to the caves that run under the entire city, which were built by the Greeks as a sort of irrigation aquifer system. But what helped as they were bomb shelter during the war, so lots of people hid in those. But anyway, the Germans managed to round up 8,000 men, which is a hell of a lot. And they took them to the football stadium, which is my next slide here. And for several days in searing heat, the men were kept there, waiting to be deported to German labour camps. And there's a school next door, which is the one on the previous slide here. And some of the students actually attacked the Germans from one of the upstairs windows. And I was lucky enough to get into the school. The person I was with managed to sweet talk the porter, who let me go upstairs into the school and stand at the very window where these teenage boys shot at the Germans while a huge crowd of women surged towards the stadium to claim back their men, like this massive column of women. So this is the actual scene. These are the actual stands where the men would have been sitting, being taken out and executed one by one. Um, it was just extraordinary to be there. And I did write a couple of scenes based there, and to have actually looked out of that window and to know what the room looked like, to see where the corridor was, is just incredible. I feel so fortunate to have done that. The Dordogne, we are going to have cherry galette.
Yum.
Well, yeah. So cherry, this has now become my kind of go-to pudding that I cook all the time. And I'll just give you the recipe really quickly. So ready-made pastry, Slices of marzipan, frozen cherries. Fold the fold the pastry over, bake it. It's so easy. It's delicious. Um, this section, I'm going to talk about people because we've talked about resources, we've talked about the place, but the people you meet and what people can give you. So my book, The School Teacher of Saint Michel, is it's my Dordogne resistance book, and it's about a school teacher who is living on in a village that is split by the demarcation line. So in 1942, Germany had invaded and it split France in two for a time. So the line went kind of across and then down. And some villages were literally just cut in two, including the village I wrote about and including the village I was in at the time. So I wanted to write a story about this teacher who was smuggling Jewish children across the line. This all came about because I used to have a place down there, and I was sitting in my neighbour's garden one June afternoon, and loads of other neighbours arrived with baskets, and it was the cherry harvest, the récolte. And everyone, Isabel was saying, we need to get the cherries in before the wasps get them. So everybody was up ladders with baskets, pulling these cherries down, and we ate cherries for a whole week. So um, my book is based on a recipe book that is found in a house in this village years later, and it's full of recipes about cherries, and each recipe is a kind of clue to what the women in the village did to rescue these children. So we've got a cherry galette, there's a cherry clafouti, there's cherry jam, it's all kinds of things. But the cherry galette is my favourite, and it comes from sitting in my lovely neighbour Isabel's garden. And here is Isabel. And she was so excited when I said, so this is Isabel on the left. She was so excited when I said, I really need to write a book about this. And then all the old people in the village were going, oh, but I remember when this happened. And do you remember when your father used to hide the Jewish children in the barn and send them over the line at night? And do you remember when the Germans were put to live in your uncle's house? Because all the German officers were billeted in houses in the area. So suddenly there was this incredible seam of first-hand stories that people don't really talk about there. They're very funny about it. They kind of go, oh, shrug, it's the war, it's over now. And Isabel said, you need to meet my Tata Jean. So Tata Jean, Auntie Jean, lives in a farm up the road, and this is Jean on the right. And I spent a whole afternoon with her telling me stories of the war. And she was 15 when the Germans invaded, and her father's farm was literally split by the demarcation line. And her father would let Jewish people come and stay in a barn on the German side, and then overnight he would take them to a gap in the hedge into the free side, because the line was quite arbitrary. It followed roads or rivers or hedges, fences, whatever. So her father had rescued dozens and dozens of people. And I said to her, that's incredible. And she just shrugged. She said, well, you'd do the same, wouldn't you? Well, I'd like to think so. I don't know. And Isabel said, show Sarah your medal. So she's got a resistance medal that her father had been given. She couldn't even remember where it was. She said, oh, it's in a drawer somewhere. Just it's amazing. So there's a whole seam of these stories that just kind of sit beneath the surface. And I just wanted to thank you. This has been so interesting and inspiring. Um, just kind of rearing to go, both to learn about the places you've told us about, more about those, but also, yeah, just the kind of really opened up a lot of yeah, a lot about research, which yeah, perhaps short-sightedly hadn't occurred to me, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you. Oh, that's really, really lovely to hear. Thank you.
I just wanted to share a comment in the chat, which is from Juliet saying, not a question as such, but I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the research process. I'm a big researcher too, and it's my MO for writing. Agree so much how important it is to get those authentic details through research visits, and also how that adds some seriously original magic to the work. I just wanted to pass
It
that on.
is the magic. It definitely is the magic. It's the thing that brings it off the page.
I had a couple of things that I asked everybody, and in the closing minutes, I just wanted to ask you too. And it's relevant to what you've been talking about having the confidence to approach people and to talk to people. And we asked everybody, who are your permission givers? So who's inspired you or you feel has in some way given you permission to take your passion for these subjects and to write, to take them seriously as a novel project, as something that you want to write a novel about? Who's inspired you? That's my question number one.
Oh my goodness. I used to work in publishing. For this an amazing editor called Carol Welsh, who was always so encouraging. I was writing a master's at the time. She'd just give me time off to go and sit in the British Library, and I watched how she edited. I watched how she worked with authors. I watched what she was looking for, what inspired her, and what gave her a spark of hope that a book would be good. And yeah, she was massively inspirational. And I have to say, my agent, she took me on a whim, really. Um, I'd run a book festival and met quite a few authors, and one of them I became really friendly with. And I sort of let slip I'd written a book. She said, "Oh, what kind of book?" I said, "Well, um, I'd written one, and then I was thinking about writing Nancy Moon." She said, "Oh, you should talk to my agent." I thought, "Oh, I don't want to talk to your agent because if she doesn't like the idea, it'll kill my love of writing. And I write because I love writing. I don't write because I'm on a contract. I just write because it makes me feel better, and it's just what I need to do." Anyway, she said, "Well, if you don't tell my agent that you've written a book, you've been in touch with her, and I'm going to tell her that you've written a book, and you're too scared to tell her about it." I thought, well, oh, okay, okay. So I did get in touch with her, and she asked to read what I was working on. And I'd literally got one chapter of Nancy Moon. I pretended I got a lot more. I sent her this chapter, and she took me on the basis of that, and which was terrifying because it was all I had. But she said, "I'm fine. I'm going to give you time. Tell me when you think you can get it done. I already know people who would be interested in this." And she loved my writing. She had utter faith in my writing. She trusted me to just go away and get on with this piece of work. And if I needed her, she was there, but otherwise she was happy to just leave me alone and was excited to read what happened at the end of it. And she's been great like that all the way along. I can talk stuff through with her. I send her random shit and she goes, or ooh. Um, we'll go for coffees, we'll go to art galleries and we'll just talk stuff through. And she's great. She has faith, and that means a lot.
Amazing. Someone with faith in you is the currency. I think is what I'm learning from our dinners and discussions. And the last question that I ask everybody, I should have said at the beginning that we did have some other guests that you can't see here at this table that we're forming. It gets a little bit longer every time. So we had Nick Hunt invited Ursula Le Guin as a guest. So
Nice.
she came along, and Adam Weymouth invited John McPhee, the writer John McPhee, to come along. So there's an extra guest there. And Hannah Shaw at our last dinner invited Alan and Janet Alberg to come and join us. So those are the extra people we've got. Who would you invite for our next dinner to come and join us?
I mean, there's only one. It has to be Hilary Mantel, Queen of Historical Fiction. And I met her once, and she was the most utterly charming, humble, modest, beautiful human being. And I would love you all to meet her.
Oh wow, you've met Hilary Mantel.
I know. Well, this is me being cheeky. I was at the RSC going to see Wolf Hall, and she was just standing there on her own, looking really embarrassed, and people were staring at her. So I thought, I'm going to go and talk to you. So I just did, and told her how much I loved her, and she was amazing. She gave me a big hug. We
Oh
chatted for
my
15
gosh.
minutes. Yeah,
I'm excited just hearing about this.
yeah,
Again, it comes back to courage. I was
yeah.
talking, everyone we've spoken to at our dinners has such courage, I think, at various sort of key moments. And there's another example of it. So thank you so much for bringing Hilary Mantel to our table. I mean, this table is getting pretty impressive, I have to say.
Bit
And
intimidating.
oh, well, not at this table because we're all just here to have dinner together and have a good old chinwag, which is exactly what we've done this evening. Thank you so much for such an inspiring discussion. It's been absolutely amazing. I had so many questions I didn't have time to ask because I've absolutely blindsided by the incredible storytelling that you've given us this evening. I just wanted to pass on thanks that's in the chat here. Naomi says, I love your writing and I love your characters, and I'm looking forward to reading your next book. Thank you for being such an interesting and inspiring host. And also from Juliet again, just to say she's making your pudding, possibly not right now, but she will do soon. And just to say how wonderful this has been, Sarah, so inspiring. The wonderful thing about doing research like this is that it takes your writer's mind off the fear of the blank page. So it gives you sort of an entry point. I really, really agree with. So yeah, I'm afraid we've drifted over our time slot just slightly, but it was worth it to have an after dinner coffee session. So thank you so much again, Sarah. Really, really appreciate your time. And this will be available, the edited highlights, so not this in-depth discussion, but there'll be some edited highlights available soon on our YouTube channel, along with all of the other highlights of the other talks. We hope to create a blog from this discussion as well, so we'll have a shortened version, and who knows, maybe soon some little mini podcasts to get into your ears. And yeah, it just comes to me again to draw things to a close and say thank you once again and release everyone back into what's left of this beautiful sunny evening. Thank you again, Sarah. Thanks to the guests. Have a
Thanks for
lovely
having
day,
me.
evening. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.